Hi, I'm Father Joseph Mary, and welcome back to A Simple Word, where we reflect on the gospel for the coming Sunday. During his time as premier of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev denounced many of the atrocities of Joseph Stalin. But during one public gathering, as he lambasted the former Soviet leader yet again, Khrushchev was interrupted by a heckler in the audience. "You were one of Stalin's colleagues. Why didn't you stop him?" Khrushchev jerked toward the crowd and he roared, "Who said that?" An agonizing silence followed. Nobody dared to breathe. And suddenly Khrushchev replied curtly, "Now you know why." Fear can be paralyzing. This Sunday's gospel from Matthew picks up right after the commissioning of the 12 apostles. And Jesus had warned them, "I'm sending you like sheep in the midst of wolves." That's a dangerous association. The wolf hunts the sheep, wants to devour the sheep. Jesus is clear, "I'm sending you out into a battle." And in Sunday's gospel, Jesus tells them that their mission has to be characterized by a radical fearlessness. He says, "Fear no one." 3 times in this short passage, he admonishes his disciples, "Do not be afraid." First, he says, "Do not be afraid," because nothing is concealed that will not be revealed. Nothing's hidden that will not be known. Jesus is telling them, you must preach the truth that I've taught you, the truth that comes from God. Men may reject you and deride you, but in the end, the truth's going to win out. Then he says, "Do not be afraid. What I have taught you 12, proclaim to the world from the rooftops." Houses in first century Palestine were all flat roofed, and so when someone wanted to make a public proclamation to a large crowd, they stood up on the roof. Jesus is telling his disciples to be boldly fearless in proclaiming the kingdom of God. Then Jesus says, fear is useless. And he's going further. If you want to be afraid of something, I'll tell you what to fear. Fear the destruction of body and soul in Gehenna. If you want to be afraid of something, be afraid of that. Gehenna literally meant Valley of Hinnom. Located in the south of Jerusalem, Gehenna was a terrifying place where in ancient times children were sacrificed to pagan gods. It was a place thought to be haunted and accursed. In the time of Jesus, it was a place where trash was dumped and burned, and the smoldering refuse extended as far as the eye could see, even from miles away. People could see the smoke rising from the ravine of Gehenna. It was a place of death and decay. And Jesus is using this place so familiar to the Jewish mind to symbolize the eternal separation from God. He's telling them, don't fear men. Don't fear the sufferings of this world. Fear only to be separated from love, from truth. Finally, Jesus ends with a word of incredible compassion and encouragement. He says, do not be afraid. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a small coin? Yet not one of them falls to the ground without your Father knowing. Even all the hairs on your head are counted. This is an incredible image. In first century Palestine, sparrows were the food of the destitute. 2 sparrows could be purchased for the modern equivalent of a few pennies. And Jesus is telling them, these tiny little birds, worthless in the eyes of men, are constantly in the mind of God, when they're soaring and when they fall. And if God so loves what you consider worthless, how much more does he love you who are made in his image and likeness? God even knows the number of hairs on your head. Do you know how many hairs are on your head? Jesus is telling us, God knows more about you than you know about yourself. God is so consumed with you that he thinks about you more than you think about you. Fear nothing. When St. Maximilian Kolbe stepped forward in the Nazi death camp at Auschwitz to die in place of another prisoner, witnesses say he was absolutely fearless. And his fearlessness so unnerved the Nazi guards that their hands were trembling as they led him away. But are our lives characterized by this same radical trust, by this bold proclamation of the truth. Far too often, we allow ourselves to be suffocated and paralyzed by fear. And the world offers us all kinds of things to be fearful of. Certainly the last few months, it's been the COVID-19 pandemic. Millions infected, hundreds of thousands dead. In the last few weeks, we've endured the unending riots and protests in the face of racism and cruelty. Every moment of every day, the world offers us something to fear, something to paralyze us. Yet the message of Jesus and the constant proclamation of the church is consistent. Do not be afraid. It's the most frequently repeated phrase in the entire Bible, appearing exactly 365 times. Do not be afraid. When newly elected Pope St. John Paul II stepped to the ambo in the Sistine Chapel to deliver his homily for the first time as Pope, he began with the words, do not be afraid. As Pope Francis celebrated the Easter Vigil Mass in an empty St. Peter's Basilica, he urged those watching through live stream, do not be afraid. So no matter what your situation, no matter what you're going through today, no matter what your struggle, no matter what your past, if you love God, if you live in the truth, then you should fear nothing. Thanks for listening to A Simple Word. I'm Father Joseph Berry, and if you found this reflection helpful, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.